we want to drive straight into the big
Right.
constitutional crises, obviously. You published an article in The Guardian, I think it was yesterday, that quite robustly seemed to defend the prorogation move of the government. Before you pressed send on that copy, you must have thought this is going to be read as a defence of the Brexit government.
Well, let me take your question apart a bit. First, it was not necessarily intended as a defence of the government, because I said at the beginning of the article that there was a legal case against the government, and two lawyers of great eminence disagree on what the outcome should be. Lord Panic, who's acting for Gina Miller, thinks the advice to the Queen was unlawful because it undermined the authority of Parliament. Lord Sumption, a former judge of the Supreme Court, disagrees with that view. Now, where two such eminent legal authorities disagree, it would be a mistake for a layperson to intervene. And then you said, well, constitutional crisis. Now, is there a constitutional crisis, or just different interpretations of the rules? My central argument was this, that Parliament has had 3 years to develop a policy on Brexit. It has failed to do so. It passed in 2017 the Notification of Withdrawal Act by the crushing majority of 384 votes, and that gave authority to invoke Article 50. It then turned down the only deal available 3 times. Now, in logic, what is left but a no-deal Brexit? How do you avoid that outcome if you're not willing to vote for the only deal available?
Parliament is apparently also against that outcome, even though it may be the logical result of what their previous votes are. I mean, just because a body in our constitution is self-contradictory and apparently not very productive, can that possibly be grounds to shut it down?
Parliament's against any of the outcomes that have been proposed. It's against a no-deal Brexit, as you say. It was also against the deal 3 times. It voted against a referendum, another referendum, by an overall majority. It's shown no inclination to seek the revocation of Article 50. It's voted against the customs union. It's voted against the internal market. The only thing it's voted for is the Brady Amendment calling for alternative arrangements in Northern Ireland.
Which don't yet exist.
No, but that's what Boris Johnson is trying to achieve. And I think the prorogation's directed as much at the EU as it is at the House of Commons, because Boris Johnson's argument is that the EU will not move as long as it thinks that people in Parliament can alter matters. I'm not sure that Parliament could achieve in the 4 or 5 days that it's not sitting what it's failed to achieve for 3 years.
Is there not a sense in which, by allowing it to be shut down and making the decisions elsewhere, the government is closing off the possibility that somehow these irreconcilable differences might sort themselves out and a majority position be found?
Parliament's meeting on Tuesday, and it's got 2 options. It can either alter the law or it can alter the government. Now, altering the law against the wishes of the government is extraordinarily difficult. It means getting an emergency debate with the consent of the Speaker. That will probably occur. And then passing legislation through all its stages in both houses. And before doing that, you have to amend the standing orders of the Commons to give legislative priority to the backbenchers, and secondly, to give authority to an increase in public expenditure, because if we stay in the EU longer than October 31st, we contribute to the EU budget. But the important point is the point of substance.
So do you bet against that
Yes,
happening?
I think it won't happen. But the important point is the point of substance, if I may just go on to that, because after all, an extension isn't a policy. What is the policy? What would Parliament do if there was an extension? Would it vote for the deal a 4th time? Pass it this time? There's nothing to stop Parliament doing that now on Tuesday or Wednesday if it wishes. Otherwise, Parliament can't negotiate with the European Union. How can the European Union negotiate with a motley collection of MPs who themselves aren't agreed? Now, the other alternative, which is a sensible one, if you don't like the flagship policy of the government, get another one through a vote of no confidence. Then you either have another government from the existing Parliament or, more likely, a general election. Now, MPs seem to be moving away from that option because they think they couldn't get a majority in a vote of confidence, which of course requires some Conservative MPs to vote against their party and some Labour Leave MPs to vote with their party, and they think they're not going to achieve that, which surely makes the point there is no majority for an alternative government.
if you were a betting man, or having looked at all of these various scenarios, do you think that a no-deal exit is the most likely outcome?
I think the prorogation increases the likelihood of that. But the ball
Above 50%?
Yes, I'd have thought. But the ball is in the EU's court. It's not in the government's court. It's worth remembering that every member of the cabinet, except two, Priti Patel and Theresa Villas, voted for the deal at least once, and that includes Boris Johnson, who voted on the third occasion. So they're not responsible for the impasse. It's MPs who voted on every occasion to reject the deal who are responsible for the impasse. It's not the government's fault. Now the ball is now in the EU's court. Are they prepared to consider any amendments or alterations to the backstop? In my opinion, if they agreed to it being time limited, the deal would then get through Parliament, but it's up to them.